Okay, so I was going to do another code along, more of a little bit more of a theory versus a lab. Um, but what we didn't get into so far, at least in this class, is permissions. And so wanted to get into that a little bit today. And this is actually pretty cool, I think, because personally, my background in IT, you know, um, goes back. Whatever. I got into IT about 20 years ago. Now is when I first started studying computers, and I studied operating systems, of which I studied Windows, and you get into back then it was Windows XP and Windows 2000, and you learn about permissions on Windows, and when you have you know um, user accounts, um, and users are put into groups, and then the groups are given the permissions. And so you kind of learn about that on, the basic operating system level of the client OS, right? So you got Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 10, and you learn about that on a client operating system. And then I got into working with servers and server administration, and a little bit more broad scope there, right? So you're just not now dealing with users and groups on a computer, but you're dealing with users and groups on an IT system. And I'm very familiar with this system where you have user accounts. You put the user accounts into groups, and then you put the permissions on the groups. And so that is very kind of granular in the sense of what can each group do, and you can get down and be very specific about what each group can and cannot do. Like you can kind of see here in this picture, you've got users and groups on your Windows administration, and then you can get down into a group and see, hey, you can either allow or deny. At the end of the day, you have a permission that's Boolean, true or false. You can allow it or deny it. And so we actually have a lab coming up, the 4.2 lab, where we actually need to assign permissions on this kind of granular in this much detail. And so I thought I'd, at a high level, kind of walk through how to do that in in the JavaScript world in MERN. And it kind of starts with this. If you're breaking it down to, well, you have a user object or a user document, and a user can have a singular role, or in this case, if you're looking at this diagram, you could see that the role attribute, it can be an array. So users can have multiple roles, and then you would combine their permissions. Okay, so that's something that we're going to look at doing. So you can be an administrator, and you can be a user, and you can be all these. You can have multiple roles. And so that is something that we might need to refactor some code as we're going along, to not just enable a single role, that's essentially a single string, but you might need to have an array of strings, so that each user can have one or many roles. But then we're going to need to create a new collection in Mongo for the roles collection. And so each role has a name and a subdocument of permissions. And so that's going to be the basic setup. And this is exactly how Windows works, and that's how we are going to work with permissions in MERN. And we are going to lean a little bit on this package that we've already used a little bit. This is Merlin Express Auth. I think it's a pretty awesome package that is going to help us make this fairly simple. Once we get these users tied into these roles, and then it all starts with we're we're going to, at least in this, and you can code along, the dog walker app. And so let me go ahead and open this up on my computer. Kind of pull this code up here. All right, and this is kind of where we left it off, where we were checking to see if users were logged in. Actually, yeah, we have a has role function where we just said, hey, the user either does or doesn't have a role. So has the role of developer, and maybe for your purposes you just need to check on an individual role, but again that doesn't really give you the I keep saying granular specificity of like, hey, what permissions can a particular role do. And so just checking on a role is one way about it, but again, checking on permissions is more specific to see if a user has a specific permission based on their roles. Okay, so that's the direction that we're headed. So the first thing I'll do here on the dog walker DB, if you click on the database, I'm going to create a roles collection, again kind of based on that UML diagram. We need to create a roles collection. And again, so a user can have an array of roles. Right now, if I go into my users, our users don't have an array of roles. They have a singular role, which is a string. Now again, we might need to refactor some of our code to make this an array and then pushing elements onto the array one at a time kind of thing. And that's fine. We can definitely do that, but for the sake of this, let's we can just manually modify the database. So in the roles, you could see that a role basically has a name and a subdocument of permissions. And so let's go ahead and insert a document, and we know developer. Roles. This is the role name, right? So the role has a name, and developer is our name. Now there's no space at the end of that. And then let's add another field, which this one is our object. And these are Boolean, right? So we're gonna have our object, and I'm gonna make this a Boolean. Now, what is this? A dog walker, right? So a dog walker app, and so some of the functionality that we haven't really used in a while is add a new dog walker. Okay, so maybe one role is can insert dog walker. Okay, and that's either going to be true or false. And so let's just say for this is a developer can insert a dog walker, and that's one permission. And let's add a field after that, and let's just say can delete dog walker, Boolean of true. And let's just say, for the sake of this example, those are the two permissions that developers have: can insert dog walker and can delete dog walker. Okay, so we go ahead and insert that, and sometimes it pretends like it didn't find my object. So yeah, so sometimes it maybe I had a mistake in there. So let's add this again, add field after name. This is an object, and Boolean. Can insert dog walker. You gotta click it just right to get a true. And let's add another Boolean. Can delete dog walker. I think that was the other one I did. Click it just right to get a true value. It says document modified. Let me click on update. Click back and forth. I must be doing something wrong. It's pretending like it doesn't want to take it. Let's try it a third time. I'm doing something wrong. Object. Boolean. Let's just do one. Can insert dog walker. Hit tab. Hit true. We'll just update that. I don't know if I have like a space in there or something that's not allowing the Boolean. Doing something wrong. Add a field. Object. Can insert dog walker. Tab true. Let me click off. Okay, it says document modified. Okay, gotta try something different, otherwise I'm gonna go crazy. So let's try edit the document. We'll just say can okay, well, let me pause this while this is acting up. Goodness, I know what it is. I didn't give the doggone object a field name. I need to name it permissions. So here, permissions, and then I can add fields to permissions. These are both Boolean fields. I just didn't name my doggone property. Can insert dog walker, true. Okay, so I didn't name my property. So let's click update. Okay, now we've got a permissions object and can insert and can delete. For the sake of this, let's go ahead and add another role. And let's insert a document and the name quality analyst and add a field. Let's make sure to do permissions, which is our object. And if you expand it, there's already one there. Let's make that Boolean. This is can edit dog walker. So only for the sake of this, quality analyst can edit. The other developer can insert and can delete. Okay, so these are the two roles that we have. Back to users, we need to make this an array. Okay, so we're going to make this an array of roles. Now looking at this, it's still roles singular, so just looking at the naming conventions and whatnot. Let's go ahead and edit my document here, and let's change this to an array. Hit sub-0, we're going to say developer. And quality analyst at sub1. Okay, so my user, EA Gudmestad1, has those two roles. Now, let me, so here's EA Gudmestad1, password of password, EA Gudmestad1, password of password. Let me just see that I can still log in, and I'm going to need to boot it up. So npm run start dev. All I've really done is modified data in the database. Okay, we're now listening on port 5000. Let's see if I can log in. And we are getting a login successful and an auth token being generated with this one user. Now this one user now has two roles, which you should know how to kind of go back and we're probably going to do that on our lab anyways. What I mean is have multiple roles instead of just a singular one in an array. Okay, now where do we go? Inside of our package that we brought in, the first thing we want to do is basically read the roles off of the user. And so there is a function, if we kind of scroll down here, called fetch roles. Okay, so we're going to have to write a database method to find a role by name, but we're going to bring in this fetch roles, and that's going to allow us to find all the roles off of a user and store it in an array of roles. Okay, so I'm going to bring in kind of in this users, I'm going to bring in fetch role. Okay, and again, kind of going here, there is a find role by name method that we need to create in our database. And so let's go to our database module, and let's say async function. We need to say find role by name, role name, and let's connect to our database. And write a query. We're going to return the data. We're going to hit the roles collection that we just created. Find one where the role name is equal to role name. Pretty simple database query. We're going to send in a singular role name, and we're going to return that document, and we need to export this, which is find role by name. Okay, so on users, we have the whole DB module here, and where we wind up changing a little bit of logic is in this issue auth token. So what we're going to wind up doing is getting all of the individual permissions and putting those permissions in the payload, so that we know we'll be able to read those permissions out, and basically, again, based on the permissions, we can allow a user to hit a route or not have access to a route. We can authorize a user to a route. Okay, so kind of back to the Merlin app here. The first thing we'll do is we'll kind of read the user by its ID. And then, so let's do that. So here we have a user ID right here. So I'll say const found user equals await db module find user by ID and pass in the user dot underscore ID. Now you're going to see, hey, wait a minute, this method is asynchronous. Therefore, the method we write needs to be asynchronous. We need to change this to async. Okay, that's going to refactor every time we call this issueAuth token. We need to await it now. Before we were not awaiting it. So I'm going to do a control F. I'm going to hold control, press F. That's going to give me a find operation. And I could see that it's basically, this function is called, it's declared once and called 3 times. So on each of the function calls, I need to now await it. And so here, if I hit next, this now I need to await issueAuth token. And go to the next one. This is on the login route. Await issueAuth token. And await, this is issueAuth token. So again, what just happened here? Well, we wrote this custom function, okay? But because it calls an asynchronous function within it, this function itself has to be asynchronous. So we mark it as async, therefore you have to await it on all the function calls. Okay, so this found user, presumably, is going to be found. And then what? Now we have this function called fetch roles that comes from the package, where we send in the user, and for each role property, we send that into a find role by name. So let's do that. Const roles equals await db module. Await fetch roles. We send in the user. And for each role, we return a db module, as I called mine, find role by name, send in the role. Okay, so the way to think of this line is we're calling this method called fetch roles. It takes a user and for each role, it's the second argument, it returns the role document from the database. And so roles will basically give you your array. Now to kind of prove that, so we send in the user, and each user has a role array, and for each role in the array, we call this find role by name method. And let's do this. For each, I'm gonna use a code snippet. I'm gonna say roles for each role. I'm going to debug user router the role. Okay, so this is going to loop through all of my roles and print out each individual role. So of course I should get 2. And now this is going to be called when I log in. So if I call this, let's see what breaks. So if I relog this guy in, okay, we get a welcome back message. And there we go. So here's the role document. I've got the role of developer with permissions, and I've got the role of quality analyst with permissions. Okay, so you could see that this roles is an array. We're looping through that array and printing out each document in the array. So that's the first step, is getting the roles for the user. Right now we have 2 roles. Then the next function we're going to bring in is this merge permissions. And so we have different roles. These different roles have different permissions. We're going to merge them into one document. So here we're going to bring in merge permissions. Merge permissions. And in my issue auth token, I don't need that for each loop anymore because we know that's working. Let's say permissions equals merge permissions for the user so the user that's passed into the function, and the roles array that we just created. Now, this is an object. This merge permissions returns an object. So I'm going to debug user router my permissions object. Okay, just to, again, troubleshoot as we go. And we log back in. And now you could see my permissions object holds all 3 permissions from my 2 roles. And that's why I think this is a beautiful package. Because again, with these couple of functions, we can have very detailed permissions that we can make up, these Boolean permissions, what they can do, what they can't do. If anything is, can't edit dog walker false, clearly you can deny permissions as well as you can grant them. So that's, 2 very simple what are called utility methods that belong to that package. Now, all we have left to do is assign, let's update our payload. Payload permissions equals the permissions object that we just created. Okay, then we go ahead and create the token, return the token, put the token in the cookie, and all of that remains the same. Okay, so you saw the permissions object. Cool. So we know that this one user can insert a dog walker. If I go to my walkers.js and let me import has permission. Now this is new. Has permission from Express.js. So we can look at an individual permission, and keep in mind that the permissions are now stored in our payload. And so this has permission function will look at that auth payload that we put available in globally to all of our routes. And so I can go down here and let's just make something up here. To list all of our dog walkers, let's just say has permission, can list dog walkers, comma. Okay, now to list our dog walkers, clearly my user that's logged in should not be able to do this. So here's just our standard, and it says right there, you don't have the right permissions. Now I think, let me log my user back in. User login, log in, list dog walkers. There we go. I had to relog my user back in. And now it says more specifically, you do not have can list dog walkers. which is correct. If I update one of my roles to have that permission, then I would. So this is an example of a permission, working, saying I don't have this specific permission. However, if I go to create a new dog walker, I'm going to say has permission, and we said can insert dog walker, I believe was the name of it. Let's put a comma there. And let me go back to my database and just make sure. Roles, can insert dog walker singular, can insert dog walker. So clearly you have a permission here where I need to do that. And so this operation, if I go to add a new dog walker and I say Joe G, it's out of my hourly rate, so let's just say $15 an hour, and I get a new dog walker added. So I do have the permission that's listed in that middleware, and so it works. And so, man, this, if I wouldn't have messed up at the beginning, this would have been a lot shorter than 30 minutes. That's why I think this middleware is so great. Again, what you do is you have roles. The roles have permissions. You read the roles off of the user, put them into an array called roles. You then merge the different roles and the individual permissions using this utility function called merge permissions into one object. So now this permissions object has all of the permissions from the various roles that a user may or may not have. You then put those permissions in the payload, and because we made the payload available to all of our routes, we can call this middleware called has permission. This middleware has permission, looks at the auth token that we called right here. We said, hey, look at the auth token that was generated and look at the permissions object in that auth token to determine, whether you can get access to this or not. So yeah, I'm glad that we have this lab, because again, I think this is very real world in the sense that you might need or want very granular permissions, and using these packages, it's not hard to do. Okay. And so, yesterday's lab assignment was 3 hours or so of a video. This was a little bit more of a theory. Tomorrow I will be going over the next lab 4.2, where we're going to use these permissions on our issue tracker.